For coming in to talk about some events that happened 50 years ago. I'm looking at this booklet that was published in this church in 1961, and it had some very interesting reports in here, some very interesting facts and figures, and some statements by people who are in this room today. So I would like you to put your mind back to 1959, because on January 29th, in 1959, there was a fellowship dinner and annual board meeting at Homes in Eureka Street. There were 120 members and friends of the church at that gathering. So that gives me a sense of the size of the church at that time. And yet, within a year and a half, when this booklet was printed, members of the church made a decision in 1960 to move. And they described it at the time as a challenge to each member and friend of the church. And it was their desire that the sentiment and love of the congregation that they had for the Homes in Eureka building would be transferred to a new church building. The minister at the time, Carl Kroll, said, "We have made some basic and hard decisions, but our achievements are beyond human ability." That's a pretty big statement. A lot must have gone on in that year and a half between that meeting in January and the time this booklet was printed and then the decision was made to come here. So I'd like you to look back in your mind, and the first question I'll ask is, could you describe for a minute just what the congregation was like? Let's say 1959 to 1960. How would you describe it then? What did people have in common? What were the interests and needs of the congregation at that time? And I'm going to give you a second just to think about it as the camera pans your pensive faces. And if you want to make an answer, I'm going to ask that you raise your hand to give Mark a chance to focus on you, okay? And just take a breath between the time I call on you and the time you speak. Just let the camera get to you. So if anyone want to venture just a comment on what your memory is of what the congregation was like before this decision was made to move? Doug, you wrote one of the reports that's in this book.
I was, and I don't remember being the church clerk. And I read the minutes of the meeting in there, you know, and I don't even remember that I was church clerk. I was kind of, I never attended church before I started dating Janet probably she graduated in 57 from Eastern High School, and and we got married in November. She graduated, it would be June time frame, and then in November, on November 2nd, we were married. And I had met her the previous year, and I started coming to church here. I think the first time I'm not sure, no, yeah, the first time I came to church here was with her. But I had dated and been out with Sally Whitson prior to that, and then I seen her here in this congregation. And the Whitsons were part of this congregation. They lived in East Lansing. And it was kind of a surprise to, I remember when I first met Janet, my brother had a black Oldsmobile 1955 convertible Oldsmobile, and he drove in our driveway with three girls. One of them was Janet, one of them was Sally Whitson, and one of them was Colleen Keyser at the time. But anyway, but I don't remember being the church clerk.
You remember them, but you don't remember the church clerk.
But I was, trying. I'd never been a church member anyplace. And so I was kind of a growing Christian, you know, or trying, I became a father in September 1958, and I wanted to be more than what I'd experienced in my previous life. And I was really challenged by that. And sometimes I felt like I accepted responsibilities in a church that I really didn't know how to do them or what I was supposed to be doing. And maybe that's why I forgot I was a clerk. I just put up my hand.
Within 2 years, you had moved from boyfriend to church clerk. Are you saying that this church was a welcoming place that,
Yes.
drew you in and gave you a job to do?
And to have people like Floyd Luganville and the McKelveys were Carl and Stuart Stad and Stuart's brother Ward and Stuart and Carl. And I knew Stuart, he was in my homeroom in high school. So. But to come into this congregation, and I had never been a churchgoer, and I had connections with somebody from high school. And I had connections with somebody I met prior to marrying my wife, her and her dad and mother, Carl and Ella Quartz, were, I don't know how long they've been part of this congregation. And when I first came to the Homes in Eureka Church, I noticed one of the windows, and it had the name Richardson on it, and that was my great-grandfather. And also there was a window there with Fred and Prudy Chase, and that was my mother's half-brother, and he was Secretary of the Senate for the state of Michigan for many years, and they were part of that congregation. But they weren't there when I came. Grandpa Richardson was deceased, but Fred and Prudence had moved to another church.
So you ended up going to a church that had roots for you.
Yeah, there was roots there, but
okay.
I had no roots in any church and didn't realize it. So it was a real growing experience, and I was a real novice Christian, and I was sticking my neck out in a way because I didn't know what was expected of me, but I knew what I wanted for my family, I guess, and that was important.
That's a great memory. Anyone else have something? Roger.
In 59 and 60, Jan and I were only married recently, because we were married in 58 in the old church at Homes in Eureka. And as I recall, most of my memories were in college at that time. I was finishing up the last 2 years of college. We lived in Sherry Lane, married housing. And I don't really recall being active, real active and all at that young age, and freshly married and all, and trying to keep Jan working. Tried to get her a second job, but she wouldn't do it. And so what I do recall, though, about that time is reactions from my parents. I take after my dad from the standpoint is I don't like change, and he didn't like change. And as I recall, he was not that excited about, one of them not that excited about making a move. And it was kind of funny because we were not a neighborhood church even then. The closest one to the church was Clay Smith, lived right around the block on the far side, or was that, not Clay Smith? No,
Schaefer.
Schaefer.
Yeah.
Lived around the block on the corner. Other than that, for the most part, we were all driving in miles to get to church. And I think everybody felt it was a neighborhood church, but it really wasn't.
A gathering place.
And that was one thing that, as I recall, through my parents, was one of the main problems of leaving that building in that location. And the answer to it was, well, we're not a neighborhood church. We drive into there, we'll drive into here. And so that part I recall. I also, seems to me there was some talk through my folks that I had heard about leaving the stained glass window, those memorial windows from some of the old timers at that time in the church. Then my next memory really was at the school where we temporarily met. And I remember setting up ahead of time and tearing down afterward. And I think I remember somebody had a trailer with a bunch of stuff in it, if I recall right. They hauled in and hauled out every Sunday. So that part I recall. And so, as I say, we were younger and more worried about college and our life together, so I wasn't really involved in the integral part, but.
Carol?
Well, my memories are, we were married at that church by Reverend Lauder and, in 55. And just the acceptance of the people, this church traditionally has always had the loving people because the older ladies were just always there for you. They were always, it felt like home because I wasn't raised in a church. And but my memories of how it all took place and the voting, we were probably there for the dinner because I doubt that we ever missed one of the dinners. But we were busy raising little kids, and I don't think financially we were able to do much as far as contributing to build the church. So the decision-making, Stu and I have talked, and we can't remember any of that, but our memories do go back to the school. And actually, Jill was dedicated at that school. And again, I myself personally at the school, the frustrations, because the guys were always busy either setting up or taking down, and by the time I had Jill, I had 4 little kids, and I was trying to keep them rounded up after they'd had enough and wanted to go home, and they were hungry, and, just the frustrations, and I do remember the relief when we moved in here, just like this, but I don't remember emotions at all, as far as what took place in the decision-making and all. And actually, the design, I don't recall who made those decisions. But,
So you weren't aware of a whole lot of discussion and debate going on
I
within
think
the
we were
congregation?
just really busy raising kids and not real involved. We were involved in the nursery for a few years, helping with the children, but other than that, we were not involved in decision-making. And I don't remember his parents ever discussing. If they did, I don't have a memory of discussing. They must have had a lot of feelings. I wish now we would have asked. But, so.
Well, Dora,
I have the same feeling that Carol has there, because I had 4. And we were having them in the back end of the church, and they were crawling
We weren't having
around.
They were
Give
there.
birth in the church.
And then that was the thing, we had a lot of babies. They were just all over the place. And, but as far as getting in on the decision-making, the only thing I did hear, rumor, people that, the Lotzenheiers that lived in the Ellen, just very close. And I heard some of them, they didn't want to move because they'd have to drive farther, and they were afraid that we'd lose a lot of members. I did hear some discussion of that. But as far as my being involved in it, I was like Carol, we were involved with kids. And I was also working at MSU at the time, so it was just almost overwhelming because we had moved back to the farm, and everything was just more than we wanted to do.
Okay, so you're describing a congregation of 120 people, a lot of them newly married, a lot of people raising children, settled where they were. From what quarter did such a bold idea as a move come from? I mean, what was the talk about it? Who brought it up and who discussed it?
I think that part of it was an urge for expansion, because we were talking about expansion in the early part of when we came back from Chesaning, because we needed more nursery space, we needed nursery space, we needed education area. And then Reverend Lauder left, and Crowell came, but there was quite a period, I think we had when you was over a year, that we didn't have a permanent minister in there.
Cole wasn't here very long either.
He was only there for 2 years. A little over 2 years, I think it was.
Floyd, what would you say about where the idea came from and how was it discussed and nurtured?
Well, I don't know all of the thing, but the church was in an old neighborhood that was, I suppose it would be described as going downhill, probably, and this subdivision in here was being developed by, I think it was the Walter Neller company. There was two big real estate companies in Lansing during that time, and I think this was Walter Neller's development, and this area was held off for a church or something by the development company, and I was really surprised when you read that statement, civilians from Carl Cole, because Carl Cole was not doing well with this congregation at that time, and I don't know the date of his leaving, but it must have been very close to that statement there that you read. And we were looking for a new minister, and I remember that Don Boer, I don't know what date he came here.
December of 60. December of 60.
That's the time he came, but I mean, when we started negotiating with him, there were two ministers that we were talking with, and one was, ended up going to the Flint Church by his choice, and Don came here from Texas, and his first sermon was, you're right, it was on the first Sunday of November of 1960. December 1960. What was your question?
Well, who came up with the idea and who nurtured it and who presented it to the
I
congregation?
think it developed out of the Board of Elders, but I don't remember any statements by any one person or anything like that.
Stu?
I think at the time, we had some, what I thought at the time was older, and probably weren't as old as us, but pretty financially well-off people in our church that probably came up with the idea. I don't know for sure, but another thing, I think there was a house on this piece of property that was torn down, and a fellow I worked with was in cutting trees down one day when I came by, this might have not been the best place for a church because Catholic Central was very close, and the neighborhood ended up being predominantly Catholic, and so we never were a neighborhood church anyway.
It was the same thing at over there with Resurrection.
Ah, right, because you were sort of in the shadow of the Resurrection Church on Michigan, and you're saying that when you moved here, it became kind of a Catholic development. All right.
Well, before that, our board had made a some sort of a proposal to Lansing to acquire a property over there before the Catholics got control of it. And we were turned down because it supposedly didn't want a church there. And then later on, the Catholics did build a church over there, or a school, I should say. And,
You mean before they build at Homes in Eureka?
what's that?
Is that before they build at Homes in Eureka, you mean?
Oh, no, the time that the development was being made here, the property over at, where the Catholic area
Catholic
was
Church.
available.
Mm,
I think the boys vocational school, is that what they called it, whatever, had moved out to another city, and that was in limbo as what they were going to do with that building before they made it a gymnasium out of it for Easter. And, but our proposal to acquire some property over there was shut down by the city council.
So this was not the first construction site
No,
then?
it
Well,
was the
not the
third
first one
one
to
there.
consider. There was
Yeah.
a period when they were in limbo, they were looking at
Mhm.
different properties, and,
Mhm.
but to answer your direct question, I don't know what prompted or who was the one that was promoting, or a group of people promoting moving from that church to another location. I think you quoted 120, I think there as being adding meeting, but
That's right.
our registration of membership was quite a lot larger than that,
Oh,
actually. That was just attendance at one meeting.
Roger?
The house that Stu talked about, I didn't remember them tearing that down. That was a house right beside the church to the south. And I was on a committee as a youth, I believe. I don't think we were married yet. And,
There's no house.
I'm talking about here,
Here,
this
there
piece
was
of
a-
property.
I thought you were talking about on Homes in
No,
Eureka. Well, on Homes in Eureka, because we needed more space,
We bought
we
them.
bought that house to the south of the church, and that was going to be for Christian education, Sunday school,
Right.
youth groups, whatever. And I'm not sure, I know we said in meetings in that house deciding what we we're gonna do,
Yeah.
but my mind is not very clear on what we did do. I don't ever remember meeting in that church. I don't actually remember having a youth group at Homes in Eureka.
Oh, yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
Now, I know my dad drove in on Sunday morning, but we weren't in the habit of driving as much as we are now, where Sunday night, oh yeah, we'll take you in. That was just out of the question. So, at that point in time, I went with my friends from school to the Baptist church because we could ride our bikes, and that's where all my youth group and learning to testify in church and pray in church and all that was taught to me by the Baptist down there, and Sunday school, and or not Sunday school, but vacation Bible school and all. I don't remember any of that at Homes in Eureka involving me, but there might have been some there, but I was not a part of it. Now, every summer, of course, going to camp was an integral part of the youth activities, and you wouldn't have missed camp session. Dick Locke and I started it at Rock Lake, and we went there one year, and he and I both decided the food really wasn't very good, and they really wanted to do too much Bible study. At that point in time, we were not real happy with that one, and so then next year we went to Crystal, and then I think, I don't know all the split up deal, but I think in the split, part of them took Rock Lake, part of them took Crystal, and luckily we got Crystal. Well, we got the better end of the deal.
Let's compare the two. Floyd, you have something to add?
A question to Dora, wasn't the building of the house there on the south side of the church, wasn't that the regional minister's home before we bought it?
Manson's lived there.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
I didn't understand that.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't know
It was
that.
bought from
Was
Manson's.
the,
Yes, right. We
Just
just
did
got
that
it.
before the area you're talking about.
Okay, and then they moved to East Lansing, because Jan and I did our marriage counseling in East Lansing at their home. the 5 or 6 or 7 times, whatever it was we did, they really had, they needed a lot of counseling for Jan and I. We might have broke a record on that.
That house was connected with our church in the sense that the regional minister lived there.
Yeah.
Right.
And the parsonage was on the other corner.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Let's discuss the two buildings for a minute, and the two congregations. What were the shortcomings of the previous building, and what were the thoughts of what the congregation wanted here that would be different?
More educational area.
We had 3 Sunday school classes going on in the sanctuary at the same time.
That, and there was a lot of stairs.
Yeah,
I think
stairs.
a lot of
Yes.
stairs, and this was made handicap accessible before, you know, it was really a big push, but there was a lot of stairways to get into the church,
In the church.
and then there's the basement with stairways,
Mhm.
and, there's a lot of steps there. And I think that's a big difference between the two buildings. But, and like I say, this was handicap accessible before that was a big deal.
Carol?
No, I was just going to say, I would have to think the design of this church was intentional with that being probably handicap accessible wasn't even the thought then, but to be, you know, it was easier to get in and out. And I think back now at, you know, that long ago, that was an important step that they took that we are reaping the benefit from. Because the other church was very difficult. I mean, the steps were,
Every place you went in that church,
Yeah.
it was steps.
Yeah.
There was no parking there other than on the street,
That's true.
and that was becoming a problem, I think, somewhat.
Toward the end, we could park in that flat.
Lot right
Yeah.
across the street there.
Yeah.
That was empty on Sundays.
And it had steel, metal handrails on the front porch that people, kids would stick their tongue out.
And not only once, but twice.
In the winter time,
You never did get fast enough.
I don't know, it must have been my brother.
Also, something else that would never fly now, do you know that we had our babies taken care of in the furnace room?
Seriously.
Yes,
Oh
seriously.
my gosh.
Yes, and, you know, that was a spot that was available. And I remember Tricia, of course, they had just had Mark when they moved here, and she was just appalled to think, you know, that we were doing this. But we didn't, so literally, we were feeling a crunch. But at that time, I wasn't, you know, I just wasn't thinking about that, but.
Does it have anything in that book about when we bought the property? Does it? So I don't know if we bought that when Kroll was here, was down here before we bought the property? Okay.
It's in the history, the letters that, of purchasing the product,
Yeah,
purchasing
and
everything.
when we were talking about the different sites, remember Whitson's? The first sites that they had and were going to buy, and I can't remember why it fell through, was the Whitson's place on the corner of Grand River and
Mhm.
Grand River where?
Hagadorn.
And
Hagadorn.
Hagadorn.
This building is?
It's where that office building is now, there on the corner, on the river.
Big house there.
Yeah,
That's where I saw my first television, because Whitson's were rich,
Yeah.
and they had a television when you got it, what, an hour and a half every night, and it was Uncle Mildy. And it sat on their grand piano, I'll never forget that. We sat there all starstruck watching Uncle Mildy and at the Whitson house.
it's interesting, I got the board meeting minutes out, and I got it marked there, the reasons that they moved. If you want me to get it.
Without knocking over the camera, why don't you come around and get
Well,
that?
it's right there.
Okay.
I thought it was, I just went through to see if there was anything that would shock our memories.
Mhm.
And I was shocked to find out that it was available. This is where I found the first thing. was that they were talking about expansion. And so here, all these, no reports, no reports, no reports. That was when Reverend Lauder was leaving and Kroll was coming. But this is what the building expansion study committee gave by Don Aper. It's too bad that Edith couldn't be here. But here is some, let's see. These are the points against the church, for considering the church was accessibility, that was number 1. Number 2 was visibility. 3, location near a center of public attraction. And there was some more here, let's see. Oh. And it says, the reason for it was inadequate classroom space, inadequate drainage, necessity of a cry room, inadequate baptistry, music room and dressing room, inadequate nursery facilities, outdated seats in the sanctuary, Catholic neighborhood, inconspicuous location.
What year was that? When was that report dated?
October 15th, 1959.
Okay, so that was the year.
Another reason maybe why Whitson's place was not considered, and I'm not sure, Floyd can probably tell on this, but our church went through 2 growing situations where there was a split, and we started 2 other churches, one in we was in West Lansing that now I think moved to South, and one is in East Lansing.
No,
No,
we didn't start
We
East
didn't
Lansing, we
start
started
East
west and south.
Oh, we didn't start East Lansing?
No.
No,
Well, then that, I was thinking if that was the case, if we started that one, Whitson's would be very close to that, so that would not make a difference.
What's your memory on that, Stu?
There was a big split, and the biggest thing, the reason it was a split was because some people wanted to send their missionary money right to Indianapolis, and others wanted to send it to the missionaries. So the ones that wanted to send it to the missionaries split, and we helped start a church on West Lansing that was on Saginaw Street when it started. And the one in South Lansing was on Pennsylvania, and now they have since built a new church on Rillius Road.
Yeah.
And the one in West Lansing is now in St. Joe, I believe.
yeah.
But there was, that was a sad split, because people who had been friends for years and years and years
That
didn't
was
talk to
hard.
each other.
Mhm.
What year was that split?
Probably about,
I think it's 56, 57.
yeah.
Okay, so after that split, continued at homes in Eureka, and then this decision came up to move. What else could you say about the congregation at the time that this decision was made? What are your memories of what congregational life was like, and what were people interested in? How did they relate to each other? Did they all cram into one living room to watch Milton Berle?
I think we were close, as I recall, in my memory, we were a close congregation. I remember that my folks were involved with, 6, 8 other couples within the church and played bridge every month. That was fun, because as kids we got to go. You never had babysitters, you always went with the parents. And when they told you to go to sleep, you went to sleep, or you got a whipping. That's why I still think whipping's a good idea, because we went to sleep. And dinners were close. I often hear, remember Ray Kreider saying, I don't remember it personally, but remember him saying how during times that were tough, those that had it brought food in and distributed it to people within the church that needed it. And I don't know, maybe we brought in, maybe we received, I can't remember, I would have been not in that realm of remembering that, but we were a close church and people drove a long ways. Harvey Kenny, for instance, drove from way out by
Canal Road.
Diamonddale or Canal, and I mean, and we drove from Hazlitt, and you drove from Williamston, and we had a lot of people driving all over just to come, because it was a close group, and that's why it was so hard and personally devastating when the split came, because it, as I recall, I think that messed up the bridge club. I don't think they played bridge after that, because half of them were on one side or another.
Any other memories of life in the old building?
You know, as I listened to everyone talking here, I kind of thought, you know, I was 15 years old when I came into this church, but Roger and I were going together, and his family was real attached to this church, his mom and dad, and I was a Catholic. And so the thing now, as I think back, probably a big thing that that kept me in us making the decision which way we were going to go by the time we were graduating and getting married and stuff. It probably had everything to do with the closeness in the families that were there, because it was something that I hadn't really necessarily saw before. We went to church on Sunday, and that was it. Saturday we went to catechism, but that was our own involvement, you know, with the church. So it probably, you know, was a lot more the congregation that, and then when Don and Tricia came, I mean, that, and we were over in the school for so many years, like Carol said, we all had these little kids, and there was Rod and Mark, and everyone, you know, just having fun. They had all this space and stuff like that, so, and then it was wonderful when we moved here to have a lot more space.
Carol?
I wished that this would have happened when Ray was alive, and I wished I could recall, because we've had a lot of conversations with him, and, you know, he had a lot of memory of what took place in this church. And, but the friendships, when we talk about the distances that people had to go to the homes in Eureka, they had very close friendships, and that split up was shortly after I joined the church. And I said, as a new Christian, it was really hard for me to understand, because when I came in, I was introduced to these people as very, very special friends. And then, you know, the stories that they shared as far as the closeness. And then to see these friendships, and it really made me wonder what this was all about. And it wasn't until I was older that I thought, oh, you know, that is just a terrible thing to happen to a church, you know, for the split. Only for the people within, because, but then they gathered together and the friendships continued. And Stu's mom and dad, when we'd have Ray and Norma up to the cottage, it was really interesting to hear their stories. You know, and it was mostly based on the church, because that was truly their life. The women in particular, most of the women didn't work when they were raising their kids until they were older, and so they had just a lot of memories of the activities. The women's fellowship was very strong. It was just a neat church. When there was a wedding, everyone went to the wedding. You know, it was a very supportive church, always has been. And,
I would like to add to that wedding thing. In those days, they had a wedding the way it ought to be had. You had the service upstairs for God. You went to the basement, had tea, coffee, and ice cream, and your cake, opened your gift, and you were out of there. Now, that's the way a wedding ought to happen. Now, it's a ordeal that goes on for days, and
it didn't cost $20,000.
That's right, it didn't, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Stu?
When Roger talked about people bringing in their produce and stuff, there was probably quite a few families that quite often would go to each other's house to eat, but somebody had some meat, somebody had some potatoes, and they brought what they had. At the time, we happened to be living out on Logan, Matthews Road. We had a couple of cows, so we always had butter and cream and whipped cream. And so, you know, Mom always furnished that, which was in eggs and stuff. But, yeah, they'd get together for meals because a lot of times people didn't have what they needed for a whole meal.
Eldora?
And I can remember when we first went out to the farm, he lost his job. And I wasn't working, that was when Robert was a baby before. And they knew that we were really hard up, and there was a whole bunch of ladies came out to our place. We didn't even have our house. We were living in a trailer with 3 kids. And they brought food, they brought clothes for the baby, because Robert was born out there and that. And it just is the way they were. And I can remember going to Lawson Heiser's house on Allen Street. And I will never forget, she had made a huge amount of bread, and it smelled so good. And I mean, that was the way it was. You went to their homes. We visited homes. We had circles in homes. We had Bible studies in homes. We didn't really, the church was home and church. It wasn't just in the, right, Carol? Don't you
So
think?
people entertained and met in their homes and circulated.
And still, like she said, people brought food out, but in the church still, if somebody's sick or had surgery, the women are still taking meals too.
We had good examples set before us many years ago.
Would anyone, after Roger? Go ahead.
Well, one thing that just came to mind about you wanting to know why we actually picked this place,
Okay.
I know that there was a feeling that because of all the subdivisions and the apartments and everything going in here, it would be a prime place to have new people come in. And I don't believe, even from the very first, I don't believe we had many that came from that. It was always the other people driving in and those people bringing in friends from work or whatever that did it. I can't ever remember having within a 3 or 4 block area of the church many people that started coming.
Doug, you're shaking your head yes to that.
Well, I don't think we were, I was new in the church, new in any church, but we weren't, as I recall, a real evangelistic church. You know, we had an evangelism committee, and I don't know if I was on it, and I remember making some calls, but I don't remember making any calls locally. You know, it was to people who might have come and visit and left their name or something, you know, on the registration. And so, and that is the way we were over there at Homes in Eureka. We weren't a neighborhood church, and Roger says, well, we came over here and all these houses being built and so on, but we still didn't evangelize, you know, we still didn't, as I recall, really make a huge effort.
Every 5 or 10 years, we'd have an evangelist come in for 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
Okay.
But like I say, this was predominantly a Catholic neighborhood because of Catholic history.
Does anyone want to recollect what it was like to move into this building and occupy it and decorate it, and how different life was when you didn't have stairs?
Where you look around and you see Janet Miller all
Yeah.
over in this
Right,
room. Yeah.
right.
She bought, she was on the furnishing committee for this room,
Okay.
and
Furniture is still here.
the way you're sitting on.
All right, these are original.
These are original. And the wall
And
hanging.
the pictures,
The
and
pic-
the, yeah.
pictures. She got them all at Estes Furniture, one of her classmates, Jane.
So we're sitting in antiques.
Jane.
Basically, yeah.
It's got one more year, 13,
Okay.
it'll be 50 years to the next year that this was dedicated.
Right, okay. Almost antiques, okay.
Well, in the kitchen, the kitchen at the old place, I didn't work in it a whole lot, but it was just a tiny, and I just remember how nice it was to have that. And that isn't this kitchen, it was in the old part. And then, of course, anything we had was in the fellowship hall was also the educational wing. And, it just had, there were many perks there that we just didn't have before. But I guess I don't, the sanctuary, of course, there were all movable chairs, and I think that became a problem later on. And that's why they redecorated or remodeled. But,
Well, that was gonna be our multi-purpose room.
yes.
That was our
that's right,
gymnasium,
that's right.
and we were gonna build a long, formal sanctuary out this way. And everybody fell in love with the roundness, the stained glass, the closeness of it, and the desire to do that kind of left everybody's mind. And when we did add on, it was for educational this way, and of course, you don't call that a gymnasium. There were, bless their heart, these people have now gone to be with the Lord, but you didn't want to talk about a gymnasium in a church. That was a multi-purpose room with a high enough ceiling you could shoot baskets, but multi-purpose. Because gymnasium was just not an accepted term.
And when we moved in here, we still didn't have enough classroom space.
No.
We had Sunday school class in the
Classes
kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
And across the
in
street.
regional office.
Yeah,
That's
we
right.
had classes across the street in the regional office in the basement after that was built.
It's all those little babies that we had were growing up.
Our people were prolific, that's
Yes,
for
we
sure.
were.
Oh, absolutely.
And
We loved to eat and have kids, I guess.
And the couples weren't all half Catholic either.
Well, how I got involved in the church, I just got, I come back from World War II, and I wanted to see what the country looked like that I fought for. So I took cranked up a motorcycle, went all the way around the four corners of the United States, 10,723 miles. And a couple of weeks later, I met Eldora in this restaurant. I was single then, and didn't know girlfriends, and she was sitting in this little restaurant, Cookies, it's not there anymore. But anyhow, and a bunch of bike riders, we went out to a little park out, and one of the guys says, well, let's have a wiener roast next Saturday night. So, okay, everybody, I was president of the motorcycle club, and so, well, I didn't have anybody to take, and I saw Eldora sitting at this booth in this restaurant, and so there was other empty stools, the counter, but said, can I sit down here? And she said, well, okay, and so I mentioned about this winter roast we're going to, and she's got the mind in the back of her mind, and she says, I will if you go to church with me. You ever seen that?
Now, I heard there was a rumor that when you got married, you were gonna build certain ramps.
Oh, yeah.
Right into the
Right.
sanctuary.
Great writer started that rumor.
Okay.
We was gonna build a motorcycle ramp around the inside the church, and we was gonna be married on a motorcycle. And, well, I would have been riding for 43 years totally, so anyhow, it was just a rumor, but everybody kept giving us
They really
upstairs, hey, what's the matter with these this new couple?
We were looked at a sort of askance at when you would imagine in a church that we're a little more straight-laced than that, but
Well, not just you looked at us, and a lot of people in the church did things that made some of the old timers. And I always think
Do
of,
tell, do tell.
I always think of where we used to get our asparagus before you started doing it, on Cunningham. And he was, I keep thinking he was Moses as I grew up. I mean, he was just, I don't know, white hair, big Bible, teacher, just, he was Moses. And so, Don Aper and Edith came, and they were of a different culture. And they always sang, before Sunday school, we always sang songs. Everybody in the sanctuary. Don would lead them because he had a pretty good leading voice, but then he got out his trombone. I thought the ceiling was going to come down in that church when he started playing the trombone, because we never had other than a harp or a violin or an organ or piano. That was all the music we ever had. And he started his trombone. Boy, I heard about that on the way home from my dad. And so a lot of the old timers thought a scan about a lot of things that happened around
Okay,
here.
so here's a church in which people played cards and went dancing and played the trombone and rode motorcycles and baked a lot of cookies. Go on.
Well, we did all the staining and all these wood ceilings, like in the sanctuary, and all the classrooms in the west wing, you know, they were plank ceilings. And we, when we moved in here, one of the things we had to do is we had to decorate. And, we had guys up there, I don't remember how they got
Scaffolds
up,
in the sanctuary.
scaffolding up there, painting, staining that, you know, and we were getting it all over the ceiling and all over our clothes and everything, you know, painting over your head, and, but it was a real opportunity to work together too, in this new building environment and get it ready for, in the shape that we wanted it and so on. And we had some people that were pretty talented at doing things and others that weren't. Some people dripped more paint than others.
I don't know if you're aware of this, Rick, but the choir sat up behind where the preacher
I've
is
seen pictures.
in there, and the baptistry was in the same place. And,
There was no changing areas, they had to go,
yeah, there wasn't, yeah.
for even the
Baptist.
Baptist.
The baptistry was over on that other corner,
Usually it come right
What
out,
other corner?
by where the
Southwest
door
corner.
comes in.
right in from the south.
Oh,
Oh, I thought it stayed where it was
South
at.
Main
Oh, I
Street.
didn't remember that
On the
was.
south wall.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
But,
they haven't changed.
yeah. Good old Marlon Mauer, he was, always had to be fiddling with something in the choir. Could never just sit quiet.
Why don't you?
And he had a tie tack that was a gun, a little gun, and you put a little cap onto it and it goes bang. And he was fiddling right in the middle of the top who were serving. He let a bang go off. I'll never forget that. That was kind of funny.
Who wants to mention another larger-than-life figure that you remember from that period?
You know, I think
Grandma Cookie?
when I was
Yeah.
clerk,
Yeah.
why Wayne Burke was a very, he was a real businessman. He was very eloquent, and he was very businesslike, and he was a guy that was a leader, you know. And I don't remember how long Wayne was around, but while he was here, he was very active, and as chairperson of the board and so on. And Francis Bust, wasn't he in charge of the building committee?
I think so, yeah.
When we,
Yeah.
trying to decide what we wanted to put here,
Mhm.
he was the head of the building committee, and,
There's,
Along
there was
with
guys
that.
like
Ambrose.
Floyd, I don't know where you were at and all that, and Tom Locke, and,
Quite
Don
a,
Aper,
quite
and
a group of executives.
Bob
Rose.
Different,
Bob Rose.
Bob
dog
Rose.
owners and,
But
Bob Rose was always,
another big figure here was Aunt Louie.
Oh,
Yeah.
She always made jam. If you was in the hospital, you got a jar of jam. She was always making cookies and,
Right, your
Um,
cookies, yeah.
you know,
Well,
I'll
when
never
I was kids, she
forget.
was Grandma Cookie.
Yeah.
I never forget, she, in her later years, she didn't drive, so she took a taxi cab. And this taxi driver used the Lord's name in vain, and she told him, I wish you wouldn't talk like that, that's my friend. And I think the guy kept
think
picking
he
her up, you know.
I
Yeah,
think he told that at her funeral, it
Yeah.
seems to me, is that that.
Well, I've heard the story that someone wanted to send Valentine to Aunt Louie, and so they put Grandma Cookie on the envelope without the address, and it was
in the
delivered.
state, article was in the state journal, it was written
Yeah.
up,
Yeah.
citywide exposure to it. And, but she was, they picked up for a number of years, Sundays to bring her over to church.
well, we still have in the trust fund, part of her left to the church is still there. It's
Memorial fund.
dwindled down, but it's still, there's part of it still there from Aunt
And Louis
Louis
Alexander.
Alexander. That's what I'm trying to think of, yeah, Aunt Louis Alexander.
She, at her time of retirement, she had a substantial amount of money coming from the state for the unused sick leave, time that she had not had over the years, and she used that to buy herself what was the years, 58 Ford,
Remember the
that
church?
she dedicated to or used to go to see the sick in the hospitals and homes and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, she used something else.
Anything else come to mind as we've been reminiscing here? I want to ask the question of what made people feel welcome coming to church when you were younger?
Well, just, for me, it was, the fact that when I first came here, I was alone. I was, single and starting at, and they just took you under your wing. I went into the church and the Lauder girls, and they just, you just became a part. You weren't an outsider, you were a part all right away. Isn't that what you felt, Doug? And then you got into it right away.
Well, I did. Of course, I was in love, and I, you know, and this is where Danny came to church, and her folks always had good dinners after church. I was always invited over there, and so
I didn't know
it was. But there were a lot of young couples too, you know, like Janet and I, and you got married the year after we did, and you guys were married when 55, 55.
Yeah, we was married in 48.
Yeah, but there,
It's always felt like it's been a sense of family.
yeah, they just, if you were alone, see, I didn't know a soul in that church. When I walked in, and it was just the fact that, the church in Bangor sent my name and, gave me the address, and I just, I lived in, East Lansing, and then in Mount Hope and Washington there, and, I don't know, I just, became a part. They just, and,
When did the Cades come to First Christian Church?
That was when Lauders were here.
And Lauders were here, because I remember Alex making the comment that he really wasn't welcome
Right.
by Reverend Lauder, and but to me, before I was, one of the places I first lived was Pine and Knolls, and Pine Street was a north-south street, and I lived on the east side of Pine Street, and west of there was all colored pretty much, not completely, but to come into the church and to see black people there, I don't think, and when I went to church occasionally when I was younger with my grandmother, Miller, why, I don't remember seeing any black people in Central Methodist Church downtown. Now, I may be wrong, but I was just a kid in Sunday school and so on. I don't remember any Native American or
African-American.
African American children in church. and then to come and to meet people like the Caves. And I don't know if they were the first black in that
I
time
think so,
frame.
yeah.
But just what a wonderful family, you know.
You know, I've heard Alex say that, where he felt that he was not welcome and it was very tough. I had, and maybe I wouldn't because I was younger and wasn't involved like older people were in the church, but I never sensed that there was anything there that was against
Oh,
them. I guess maybe I was living in a dream world, but I never sensed what he portrayed, and
yeah.
so,
Stu,
He had been a disciple before they moved here. And Reverend Lauder said, you know, they have churches for people like you here.
oh boy, I didn't
And
know
at
that.
first, when he was first elected as a deacon, there were some people, men in the church that would not walk down the aisle with him.
You know,
Boy.
that
and he
surprises me.
persisted, he persisted.
That surprises
Absolutely.
me though, because Roger's got an older brother that grew up in this church too, and they moved to Flint after the kids were married and everything. But every single time we see him, he will ask again about how, you know, how he
Right.
is. He was his Sunday school teacher, and he said, I just learned so much and just grew so much in, you know, in the association I had with Alex Kay.
And our kids were very close to Bonnie and Icy. Viola especially, Bonnie and Icy were very good friends.
But I think the age we were at that time, we didn't see it happen.
Yeah,
like that.
maybe
Like,
that
you
was
heard
it.
things with water and stuff, but we didn't see that happen.
I would like to make sure there's time today for each of you to tell a story that is a favorite of yours. And I'm going to start by asking Floyd. Floyd, how old were you when you first came to the church, and what do you remember about your first experiences with the congregation? And each of you can pick a memory of your choice. But let's start with that one.
Well, I was 25, out of the Air Force, and I was immediately offered a job, wasn't looking for a job, but at the J.C. Penney Company here in Lansing, and I counselor at the business college where I graduated, he suggested that it was a pretty good company, and I wanted to look into it. He had the letter there, and he handed it to me, and so I came up and looked, and
Where were you living at the time?
in Bern, Indiana is where
Mhm.
I grew up, in Hoosier. And I came up and I took a room in the Y, it was directly across the street from the Penny Company, which was down on the corner of Washington and Michigan at that time. And the first Sunday, I had looked up I had grown up in the Church of Christ down in Indiana, and I looked up the Church of Christ, and it was out here at Holmes in Eureka, and so there was no bus service on Sundays in those days, and I walked out to the church and walked in. I was a little bit late, and there was a Sunday school class going up in the balcony right out to the entry area, and what's the lady's name that used to be up there?
Nell.
What?
Nell.
Nell Campbell. No.
yeah,
Yeah, Nell.
was it no?
Anyway, I had grown up in the church, and my dad was a leader in the church, and he had conducted the leadership on a Bible study thing when I was 8 years old, so I knew a little more about the Bible, I guess, than some kids, and grew up with it, and I didn't keep quiet, I guess, when up in Nell Campbell's, they took part in conversations, the teachings and so forth up there, and answered questions, and I got drafted right away into being the teacher for the Sunday school class on the balcony of the church, and I was there for quite a few years, I guess. But,
And then when he was in the choir lounge, we used teaching.
yeah, I was in the choir lounge where the Sunday school class was at. And anyway, one of the things that bothered me quite a bit, in the Air Force, I was an instructor, small engine pilot instructor of B-25, and I was also qualified for the B-26, which was the most dangerous plane in the Air Force as far as training was concerned. They killed more people in training with that one plane than all the rest combined, but I like the plane, and, but Mary Ellen Smith's brother-in-law, in the Sunday school class, had enlisted in the Air Corps, and he went in the Air Corps and was not in there too long, was killed in the B-26. Still don't understand. Anyway, I've been drafted in too many positions in the church ever since, I guess. In fact, we're talking about the ministers coming into the church. We had an elders meeting in my home over Westmoreland Street at the time we decided to make an offer to Don Moore to come to our church. Well, there was a number of people there that are long gone, and George Greenleaf is one of them. He's still here, and he calls me every once in a while, yet from either Arizona or Ohio, where he's at now. But there's been a lot of people that have come and gone over the years, and it's been a home for a long time. Talking about things that used to be, we used to have large Bible study groups, and there was one that was developed out of this was a lookout class at the time. We had 15, 20 people who come around to your homes. And they had people out to our home, and then we had to modify our home, and we didn't want to quit having people out there. Our living room was cut down so we could have a utility room on the first floor for Ann's benefit, and that's the reason we added on to the house, but we didn't have very many meetings after that, so large living room that hasn't been used in a while.
Jan?
That's enough.
Thank you, Floyd, thank you.
I think, as I think about the different times, you know, when I first started coming here, and then we go through having our family, and then moving into this church, and I think when we moved into the church is when it really kept us here. We had a Couples for Christ Sunday school class that was probably closer than I had been even to people that I went to school with and stuff like this. And it wasn't just a Sunday school class. We had monthly meetings where we got together and did things with each other, any kind of party you could think of. I mean,
It was a monthly.
we had one.
Yeah, right.
Mention Dan.
Huh?
Mention Dan.
Yeah, and then Dan Harris, then he got us great Bible studies going, and but that's kind of the thing. Every time I think about things or go through old pictures, the Couples for Christ pictures come up, and I think that was a time when we really needed to have friends, and when we were raising our kids and going to ball games and stuff like that. So, that's,
Doug, you shared a story already about coming to the church. Anything else you want to add, a memorable event?
Well, I don't know, Dan and I were married by Newton Fowler. He was an interim pastor. He was from the south someplace, I don't remember where. Young man, I really liked him. You know, I was kind of intimidated when I first came to church by what I figured that, you know, I wasn't a Bible student, and I didn't know much about Scripture, and I wanted to learn, but I was a little intimidated about it. But Newton Fowler was a down-to-earth guy. I don't remember how long he was here.
Don't forget his name, they call him Fig Newton.
Oh, yeah.
Was what?
Fig Newton.
Big Newton?
Yeah.
But anyway, he was a memorable person to me, and of course, like I said before, I knew Stuart and Carol from high school, and I had met some of the other people that Jan went to school with when we went to Eastern. There weren't many Sextonites here, Sexton High School. Stuart and I were in the same homeroom, but I don't remember.
I was next door.
Huh?
I was right next door to you guys. I
And
didn't know it at the time, though.
Warren McCalvey was very active, and he was very active in teaching Sunday school and so on. And And it was easy to, Warren and Nancy were easy to be with and so on, and they had kids our age, just like Sue and Carol, our kids' age. So that was comforting to be in a church family, and particularly as being a person who was new to the church, I had a connection, something in common with a lot of young families and so on.
Thank you, Doug. Roger?
Well, I was just born into the church. I had no choice. I went along with the folks, and it was a good thing. It was very memorable. I participated, as most kids, in rebellion. I would sneak out of church and go up to Benny's for a soda, and had it timed so I could get back and get in church before they let out. And I mean, you know, Dick Locke and I were terrible twosomes, but they all got me through it. We grew up, and Dick went into the printing business from his dad, and I went into the insurance business. But when Jan and I met, Jan was a Catholic, and of course I was a Protestant. And one thing that seemed to hang in my mind is that it isn't going to work if we're each something different. We got to be the same. A Catholic and a Protestant together, it just isn't going to work. So we talked about it because we knew we were going to get married. And I said, I'll take some Catholic courses at MSU, and then you come to church with me, and we'll decide which way we're going to go. Well, I never told Jan this, but I never had any idea I'd ever turned Catholic. You know, so it was really, I was bluffing, and it worked. My Catholic course at MSU was with Father Mack. I don't know if any of you knew him, but he was something else, not in a nice way. Very stubborn, very authoritarian. And after the second day of class, he called me up front and he said, "Do you want to pass this class?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Then shut your mouth, write down what I tell you, and you'll get through it." So that's the way I fit in, because he didn't like to be questioned. And Jan, bless her heart, she fell in love with the church and the people, and we were married here. So that's where we started on the.
Thank you. Carol?
Well, I think one of my greatest memories, Marge English was doing the youth group, and that was back when Jan, her youngest daughter, was in youth group. So she asked if Stu and I would help her. And now I think back, and I think it was kind of a already arranged job, because Stu's mom immediately said, because I think by then we either just had Terry or we had Terry and Steve, I can't remember. But his mom said, well, we'll watch the kids on Sunday night and you can do this. And a lot of those memories, I just remember the Aper boys were such busy boys that their dad would never allow them to come in without him, which we were always thankful for. And he stayed to control his play. But I just remember the closeness that I got, and Marge, of course, is Joy's mother. The closeness that I felt. She was such a sweet lady. And I think she made quite an impact on my life as a new Christian. And, you know, the fact that she really felt that we could be there with her. And a lot of the memories kind of slipped my mind, but a year ago, Jan surprised us by sending a picture of Marge and Stu and I, and we have to assume that it's a Halloween party with the youth. We were dressed up. I wore his Navy uniform, which that was fine, but Stu was dressed as a lady, which we cannot imagine him ever doing this. And
It's a welcoming church.
so,
Marge looked like a teenager.
right, and Marge looked like a teenager. But it was just the funniest picture, and it brought back some memories. But then, you know, through the time, I think the greatest too was Caraway when it started, and I was involved right from the start. And you know, just what has taken place, and now exciting to me to hear that they want to go back to the full-time. That was a big impact on our church. I think that really helped. And memories of vacation Bible schools and teaching, and also teaching Sunday school classes through the years. Just all really, really positive memories.
Okay,
That's-
thank you, Stu.
And I was like Roger, I was born in this church, I probably didn't come to church since I was 2 weeks old. And, to pick any memories, we did have a youth group, and we had some neighborhood kids, Oswald kids, used to come to church, to Sunday school and youth group. And, as we got a little older, I don't remember doing too much in meetings at youth group. We'd get together and we'd either go bowling or, do something with young people together. And then always end up at somebody's house for snacks and stuff like that. And the Couples for Christ class, that was a good class. We had some wonderful times. But after probably 15 years, we had to change the name from Couples to Christ to Seekers, because there was some people who weren't couples that was coming to class then. So, and that was a good time.
Yeah.
We became politically correct.
Remember, we used to meet at the parsonage, at the old church. Our Couples for Christ would meet actually in the parsonage. They
Yeah.
opened, I don't even know, was it their living room? I can't remember. But,
Probably not in the office where we had a Sunday school class.
I have Halloween pictures too that would embarrass you guys, the way we dressed up.
You should bring them in. You should bring them
I
in.
should.
Well, when she said I dressed like a woman, I think I had a potato sack dress on, so
Ah,
I'm probably a bad lady.
Lloyd, take your best shot here.
Yeah, well, I was in the 30s, we had the Great Depression. You could buy gas at 10 gallons for $1, and we didn't have the money to even buy gas to go to church. So every Sunday morning before daybreak, well, we had to eat, and we had a 160-acre farm up near Stanton, north of Stanton, and so I'd go fishing. I knew just where the spot was, a nice big black bass, about this long. And I'd drop anchor, drop my bait down there about 30 to 40 feet. So I pick up 3 of those fish. Hey, now I'd go back up the house, we'd have fish dinner. And then we also ate turtle up there. But I never got into church until I'll go with you if you go to church with me. So I've been in this church ever since.
Eldora?
Well, I came to work at MSU in 46. And I lived in East Lansing, and then, like I said, on Mount Hope, just off in Washington Avenue. And so I can't remember, but I think how I got to church, but I went quite regularly. But what I remember the most is the lookout class, and that was a big class. And we met up in that choir room quite a bit for a long time. And then there was a time, if we remember, the fire.
Yeah.
And we met every place we could have possibly, in that class, met around the furnace down where the youth.
There was a fire in that house too.
And so it was, but the person that I remember as much as anything is Eileen McGalley.
Okay.
And we lived in North Lansing on Reasoner Street, and they just lived a block or so. And so we spent shared rides, because for a while, either I drove or she drove to different things. And We became good friends over the years, and then, of course, she died quite young. But she had a lot of influence with me when I first came.
I think Dale ought to have a chance to, he was
Yeah,
in
Dale
this church
has.
fairly young.
All that knowledge sitting over there,
On and
just
off.
quiet.
I was just thinking that, Mark, we haven't thought about this before, but this might make good YouTube material, wouldn't it?
Tell us how old you were when you really decided you liked this church and wanted to stay.
It was when my folks decided to stay. Like Roger, did you have a choice? No, these are good memories, and I appreciate everybody coming forth. Wasn't so bad, was it, Jan?
Thank you very, very much. I can only think of one last thing. If you want to shout out one word that you would use to describe our church, and if you could pick an unusual and surprising word, that'd be colorful. One word that you'd use to describe it.
Close.
Family.
Caring.
Support.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yes.
No, you're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Mark.
I don't know.
Back to what life was like in the congregation about 1959 or 1960, okay, in that period. And we're just going to reminisce about what church was like then and what the hopes were and how the plans came about. And I'll just introduce it by saying I read a booklet that was written in 1961 about this church, and it mentioned a meeting in 1959 on January 29th. There were 120 members and friends at that meal, and within a year they decided to make the move to build a new church here. Carl Kroll was the minister then, and he wrote, "It's a historic decision to relocate our church. We experience oneness in spirit and purpose. We have made some basic and hard decisions." Now, it's a big decision for a congregation of that size to think about moving. And we just like to think a little bit, that's such a bold idea. Where did it come from? How did people talk about it? What did they think it would be like? How do you transfer all of the feeling and sentiment and attachment from one building to another? What was it like to move everything here and to set up shop and reorient yourself to a new space? That's what we want to talk about today. So we're just sort of reminiscing about an exodus in the church life. Some of you had your names on a document. Wayne Frank and Bev Hefke were part of a planning committee, according to the booklet I read in 1961.
I don't remember.
So we'll start with you introducing yourself, and just, if you might think, what were you doing in 1960, about the time that the church was thinking about relocating? We'll start with you, Alex. Just tell us your name and just a brief description of what was going on in your life at that time.
I don't really remember. I'm Alex Cade, but I don't really remember too much of that. I've had brain surgery in between. But anyway, I was involved in programs. I wasn't even in on the planning deal. I had the post-high school class, and it was mostly beyond this church. This was the largest congregation involved. They were called the Advanced Christian Fellowship. You remember that, Beverly? Do you remember that, Mary? We had quite a large group of post-high school students involved.
So you were involved with that group of people?
Yeah, and Paul Sweeney was responsible for getting those students to come to this particular church, and that's why this church had a larger number of those students than any other church in the state. they call it Advanced Christian Fellowship. And I was involved with those kids statewide. This was the nucleus
Wow.
here in this church. And I wasn't too involved with the church. In fact, I thought that maybe they were, I shouldn't tell you this, but I thought maybe they had not considered everything, that maybe was a little premature.
Okay, that's tantalizing.
That's what I was really thinking
Okay,
at the
good.
time. But I hadn't thought through because I didn't
Uh-huh.
go through with them everything
All right.
that they had thought and that they were thinking.
Carl?
My name is Carl Lawson Laser, and he remembers a lot more than I do. I was busy raising 2 boys at the time and starting a design career. And I vaguely remember subject coming up prior to this big move, but I guess my mind and just getting through art school and stuff, it wasn't a big deal for me. So they're going to move. And I guess they just had a lot of faith that it was going to happen, and it did. So other than that, I don't really recall a lot. Life in Tom Ames, kind of tough. So, but we got through it.
Maybe you'll have some questions for other people. Yeah. Harold?
My name is Harold Hefke. I got married over there, and I wasn't there too long either, and my memory is not the best, but one thing I can remember is everybody almost parked on the street. Over here, we have parking. So, looking to the future. And the temporary setup at the school, well, you had to set up tables and chairs and get everything ready for the service and then put it all away. But there was parking there. Not so true there. I think we were outgrowing our church and it was time to move. How many lots were bought here? Does anybody know?
You mean for the construction of the church?
How many lots on this section, and
Uh-huh.
there were some lots over there also,
Uh-huh.
and they were lots for houses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was some discussion of that in the other group, that it seemed that the designers of Groesbeck had set some space aside for a church, or 2 churches, but someone else had a recollection that there were a few houses immediately close to this area that
Well,
are no longer here. Do you have
another
a memory of that?
another understanding is this used to be a farm.
A farm?
There was a farmhouse here because there was some huge trees. It had a great big,
Willow, I think.
it was a willow,
It was a
yeah.
messy one.
A real messy one, and then we had a huge cottonwood tree over here, and it, again, the house, somebody said there was a house here somewhere, and they had a barn and nice rich soil. That's why our flowers grow so well.
Okay.
This was kind of the edge of the city,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
For us to go from, I lived on the east side of Allen Street, to go to Michigan State, that was a big event.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Bob?
that's my recollection.
Okay. Yes, Bob, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name's Bob Bayhan. I go along with Harold on the parking. I remember Al Waterworth was the minister back in them days, and we had more than one. I had the other minister, started with a C, I believe.
Crowell. Carl Crowell.
Kroll.
Uh-huh.
Okay. But I think the main thing also was the parking. I used to talk to people, and then going downstairs, was a burden for a lot of the older people in those days. But I really remember people would come up in the church to have park on the Eureka or the homes from Michigan Avenue coming down, and I think that was the main thing. One of them, but and then we had two fellows that fought a lot. Clayton, was it Clayton Smith?
Yeah, Clay Smith.
Clay Smith, and I forget it, Betty that they used. The minister would admonish him every once in a while, but I started in 1927, I was carried in, but 1937 I was baptized, and Ray Crater had the Boy Scout troops there.
Christian Endeavor.
Pardon?
And Christian Endeavor group.
Yeah, and we used to meet there and had a lot of fun. Then we also started from there up to Crystal.
Crystal
Were you
Conference
ever at
Center.
Rock Lake?
Oh yeah, many years. Carl brings up every once in a while, or Dale, I mean, we had a 1937 Terraplane. We used to try to make it up the hills. I'd drive up there, and we're gonna make it up here, yeah. Just hang on, you want to get out and push, but we'll make it. But, my mother was a real good Christian. She kept us kids in pretty straight line. But, that's the main things I can remember. There might be more, but
Okay.
they come later.
All right, good. We're gonna prime the pump. Bev, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Beverly Hefke, and I've gone to this church all my life. But I really don't remember a whole lot about the move. I think we probably outgrew that church and plus the parking area. And I can remember we had a young couples Sunday school class, and I think Ray might have been the teacher of that, I'm not sure, but we had quite a few young couples in that with little kids. And we had lots of parties and good times together with them.
Where did you
And-
have your classes?
Pardon?
Where did you have the young couple?
We had that class, some of the time was over in the parsonage, and that
That's what I
one
thought.
in the sunroom or whatever they call it. But that was pretty full most of the time. And,
Didn't they buy a house
Next door?
next door and
Matson's house.
the other
Yeah.
house too?
And have classrooms in that.
and I think the people who owned this land, named part of it anyway, was Jaeger. My parents knew them, I don't know how they knew them, but they knew them, and I'm not sure that if there was a house
I
on
don't remember
the land here when we bought it
Okay, okay.
or not,
All right.
but,
Do you remember being on a committee in 1960? According to that booklet, it said Carolyn Davis, who's Carolyn Dunn now. I'm sorry, Carolyn Davis, Wayne Frank, Bill Miles, and Bev Hefke were the members. There were a few others, but there are four that we still know
no, I
about.
don't.
Okay. This is what was in the report. It said, it's been a challenge to each member and friend of this church. We're going to transfer our sentiment and love to a new church building.
But we were married in 1958, which was,
Okay.
Carl Kroll got us to move, or got this program going, and then he left.
Mhm.
So, it was between the time that he left and Don came that we got married. So my grandfather married was,
Earlier.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
There's
Okay, we know what to hone in on with you. Mary, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Mary Williams, and
The only thing I can tell you about the move is, when they started, I was with the group that would go around, looking at buildings. But I was teaching Sunday school all this time, and, I was in Christian Endeavor. That's where I met, my husband, and, we were married in the church. And, but most of my time has been, since I was 15, was teaching Sunday school. And I taught until well after my children were all born. So what went on, I remember the worry about how much it's going to cost us for this move, but the church did need to, the congregation was, the church was full, and even the kids, the young people were vying for a place in the balcony. So our Sunday schools were held in the balcony and all over the church. I remember decorating for Mary Baxter's wedding. I remember when we were thinking about going from the women's group to Christian Women's Fellowship, and how that evolved, how it started, and how it, I remember my father and my sister and her son, when the church was dedicated, they came out from Ann Arbor to attend the ceremonies in the opening. And I remember when Don Bork came, they had a meeting to visit with Don and to meet Tricia, and just things went on from there. But those are the memories I had. Most of the time I was teaching Sunday school.
Okay.
And I remember one time Alex come in to see how, what we were doing. And the kids, at one time, the children saved their extra money from Sunday school class to buy rabbits to send to care for people, for the children there. Don Gore, that was when we were in this church. Don Gore had a dedication of the monies that the kids had collected to give to care for rabbits.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. We're going to go around the room again and just reminisce on what the congregation was like, let's say, up till 1960 in the Eureka and Holmes building. What do you remember about the congregation? What did they like to do together? Were they very similar to each other? Was there a diversity to them? Just, can you give us a picture of what a church life was like in the old building?
I would say that it was pretty diversified. We had the young people, the lookout. I was a part of the lookout myself. I taught the, as I said, the college kids. We had to teach up in that, what do you call that?
Balcony.
The balcony. That's where my class was held. And I remember one of the April boys jumped out of that down into the main pews. I don't know how the kid did that. Why he didn't get seriously injured. But we had that, and we were kind of cramped for space. I remember that. To divide, because we had a lot of classes. Did we not?
Oh, yeah.
A lot of, from adults, young adults, couples classes and things like that. We had quite a few classes in that area. And so we did have a diversification of people by ages. I think we did. And the programs was kind of developed to meet those particular needs. I'm trying to think of anything else that I remember specifically. We did a lot of work, like we painted the building twice while I was a member over there. We painted those other houses as well as the church
The outside and the inside.
twice during that period. And I was over there just from 56 to about 60 something, about 60, I suppose. And that, I was trying to think of how many ministers we have. Do you remember Newton Fowler? Where did he come in?
Fowler?
Because
He was after,
the
Mr.
regional
Lyon,
minister
wasn't he?
was the pastor who,
He might have been an intern. Fowler.
Yeah.
Oh.
I journed under Newton Fowler.
yeah, I think he was after,
Lauder,
Lauder,
he was right after Lauder.
I think so.
And then Newton Fowler. And then
Yeah.
Carl Crowe.
Yeah.
And then Don Doyle. We had quite a few ministers right then, about 4 years. And when we moved over to Fairview School, I didn't like that at all. That
I never
atmosphere
went there.
there was not
Didn't you?
very reverent, of course, it was a
I
school.
never went to.
Nobody mentioned that when you was going around. Do you guys remember
What, that?
Fairview? Do you remember
Oh, yeah.
Fairview School?
I don't remember,
I
but I was more concerned about my father at that time, and,
I don't know how many months we were in that school. Does anybody know that?
Eldora would know more about the school, but I don't, and I don't live very far from there, but,
But the group, you asked about the group was, I think, closer in a different way. It was a little more formal, but close. What do you think, Beverly? I think it was a little more formal, but close. That building lent itself to that, I think.
How so?
I don't know, it was a traditional building.
Maybe because it was smaller,
It was small,
Yeah.
a traditional building.
packed more people in.
Yeah,
So you had to be reserved. You couldn't run loose.
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And this building, of course, lends itself to kind of running good.
Mhm.
Our
Was it a young,
fellowship-
was it a young congregation at the time and people were starting families? What was the predominant age group?
What would you say? We were young, so you look at it through your eyes,
Pretty
you know.
balanced,
I don't think there's
because
any
there would be
big-
like my parents' age
Uh-huh.
group,
Uh-huh.
which were Kreiders and Swabs and Carl's parents, and
But there were a
there
lot
were
of,
probably others too, but,
younger
and then
people.
in our age,
Mhm.
Like Dale, and Joy, and Hugh, and McAlpines, you know, and
Yeah.
Warren, and so on. So a lot of younger people, right?
Mhm.
Proportionally far more than we have now. I would say.
Yeah, okay. Carl, any thoughts at the time? I know you were busy raising a family, but what did you think about the
Well, I
building?
can remember before the move, it seems like my mother was always there cooking something in the kitchen. And I think as I look back, it was probably a fundraiser of some kind. The women would get together and make soup and sell it in the neighborhood. And we lived close enough to Pattengill
I didn't
High
know that.
School, and I could come home at noon. And we had X number of quart and 2-quart jars of good beef soup to sell in the neighborhood. And I think that was part of the fundraiser that the women in the church got involved in. And
Probably couldn't do that nowadays.
It's not.
no, the state would kick in
Yeah.
real quick. But there was a lot of fellowship, I think, in the church. I can remember my parents and the Whitsons, and they, I don't know who was the instigators of it, but they put on programs and things. It was kind of a meager theatrical show, but they did what they could with the means that they had. And as I look back and you ask now, yes, I think we were ready to move on. We were married there in 1951 and went away to school for 4 years. So there's a gap there when you mentioned the one minister, Kate. I don't even remember the guy's name, but I remember Carl Crow giving us a dog. We were pregnant for our third son, and Elliot just about had a fit. He gave us this little rat of a Chihuahua. And Elliot just, you doing what? I gotta raise 3 boys and a dog. But we lived through it. And I remember saying the next dog we get's gonna be a man's dog, and it was an old English sheepdog. But, I wish I could remember more, but my first job involved working a lot with the university, and then I had an opportunity to go there and be the designer for the university during the big building booms. My life was pretty well wrapped up in building dormitories and doing public spaces there, and not here at the church. Because they haven't had that big boom on building since, except for the new art center, which is a misplaced object in the community. Just my own personal thought.
Speaking of formality, do you remember that Reverend Lauder wore his tails in the striped pants?
Yes, that's what he wore for our wedding, yes.
He was
Oh,
a
my.
Kid Scotsman.
Yes.
Tails and striped pants.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Every Sunday.
We did things up right.
Wow. That's
We
quite
write
a...
our own vows.
His, when they came and preached, you could see he was really a Scotsman because he had the bird.
Really? Wow.
And he was very, I remember him as being very straight-laced.
Right.
And he was the one that had the daughter that was, she had some memory problems or something like that. I don't know. I don't even remember her name, but
She was a good friend of my sister Ada. I can't remember her name either.
so I
Well,
think
there was
he,
Eulalie, but then the younger one, Eulalie was our age, was
Okay.
Ada's and
The
mine.
younger one, okay.
And her name was
And,
Eleanor or something.
Eleanor or something like that, I don't remember.
I think she had bad knee. She,
Yeah, it was probably that. But I remember when my sisters were getting married, they wanted Al Waterworth. And they were told by Reverend Lauder that Al Waterworth was not the minister anymore, he was. And so they had to be married by Reverend Lauder. But he was, I think he was here at least, I don't know how long he was here, but he was well liked as far as that goes. I was involved more with the Sunday school and with Christian Endeavor. I remember going, being in Christian Endeavor when I met my husband, and Dale McKelvey is the one who put us on a committee to feed to fix a basket for Christmas family.
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, I'd say it was a done deal that Jesse and I would always be together. So. But I remember as a youngster, the pinnacle of becoming a young person was joining Christian Endeavor. And they had an up-and-coming group. They were always doing something. The Schaefers, the Chases, Clinton Aldrich, and his wife. There were several marriages within the group.
Sounds like the life of the church was really in those Sunday school classes. And
We
people,
were real good friends.
What did you like to do together within these classes? within the class you were in?
Well, you mean the Christian Endeavor
Mhm.
group? It was usually, they had their Halloween parties. I remember going out to Acres, and they always had a costume party. I think mostly the Acres. I remember the Schaefers, but they were more, a little bit more, what do you say, organized. They had fun, but I think the Acres were the pinnacle of the church. Everybody liked going there.
So you had church in people's homes. A lot of the life of socializing
Oh,
was
lot.
parties and
Lot.
events in people's
Mhm.
homes.
I can remember we had box socials, I guess those were kind
Oh,
of
yeah, yeah.
in the basement of the church. And,
And we decorated for, well, the women of the church got together and decorated for Mary Baxter's wedding. And the basement of the church was full of women for that shower. And the Sunday school classes were held down there. All the meals, I remember when can't think of their names now, but she's out in Pennsylvania. Help me out. My memory is.
Peters?
Yeah, the Peters, Madeline and Eddie Peters. That's where we first met them, was in the church basement. And they had parties for them. They had just to welcome them to the church. Jesse was helped them. The Apers helped them. There were several other men who helped them get established, and Jesse had Eddie. Jesse had a side job where he painted houses, washed and painted houses, and he and Eddie became fast friends that way. There was another displaced family that came, but I remember his name was Jack, and they had 2 daughters, but somewhere along the line they faded away, and I do not know where they came. And next came the other displaced family.
Okay.
But everybody was excited and enthused in having the displaced families here. They did everything they could to help them. Auto owners, I think, is, was it auto owners that helped get them a job and get them established. But the church, for the main part, was a big help.
So really tight association of friends and families, and then reaching out to other people who needed a hand. That's great. Beth, what are your memories of life in the church, back in the Eureka building and in people's
Well, I
homes?
remember CE, Christian Education, the group, they had a pretty good sized group. I taught the 4-year-old Sunday school class, which included David Lukenbill and Bob Rose Jr.
Wow.
So, taught that for quite a few years. I don't know,
Christian education was really important.
yeah.
And how about the parties in people's homes?
Yeah, we had our Sunday school class.
Okay.
We had Halloween parties.
Well, good ones at his house.
And then
Good
we would
ones
just
at
have
Dale's house.
parties sometimes, you know, just to
and
have a
Betty
group.
Betty Miles, but what was it, her parents' home?
Fun.
No,
correct, yeah.
Wrights, yeah, Cecil and, Frank.
Yeah.
Um,
You know, some of the people that we were real close to, Elnora Chase, Fern Keller, then it went on to to the acreage. And going to Rock Lake was supposed to be pinnacle, but to tell the truth, I thought Crystal was much better.
Okay.
I love going to Crystal.
We went to Rock Lake, partly because my grandparents had a cottage there on Rock Lake, and so we went there because our church was kind of on the fence, I guess. It was either, some of the were the Independents and some were Crystal. And I just saw in those little things they've been putting in the newsletter. In 1935, we had 2 people go to Crystal.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
I didn't know that we had anybody that far back, but my brother went to Crystal one year. I can remember all the rest of us went to Rock Lake. Yeah.
It was at Rock Lake that, not Carl, but Al Waterworth and a missionary from Africa tried to teach me how to swim.
Oh.
And I got to the point where I could float, but the missionary and Al Waterworth told me that I would make a very good stow.
A very good
I
stone.
have never learned how to swim. And I'm scared to death to get in the water above my chest.
So what was the split between the Independents and the Christian church then? And how did
I
that
think
affect going to camp or not?
I don't know.
I think that it was the missionaries. Independents felt that in working with funding and teaching and all was different than the people from Indianapolis. I remember going to Cincinnati Bible Seminary, which was definitely independent. And I went for 3 months, and that's what they were talking. They were very much against the people in Indianapolis.
Wow.
When the circles, when the women's group decided they wanted to become a fellowship, they had a meeting in the church at Homes in Eureka, and that's when when I saw a lot of the contention between the two, because that's when certain members of certain women of the group were very much against deciding, having the women split up into groups, circles. And they drew away from the church. And at the time Virgil Felton came, the church was behind him, and he built the South Lansing, not South Lansing, but West Lansing Church.
What was the issue between, what was the conflict between splitting into circles?
I think it was the way the money was spent, like
Okay.
with the Independent,
All right.
that you sent your money directly to
Okay.
whoever you wanted it to go to. Where the Indianapolis people would divide up the money so that everybody basically, I think, got the same.
Okay.
Originally, it was that way, you see.
All right.
Yeah.
It was strictly a monetary thing, like you said, just like you said. But now it has been definitely become almost a doctrinal thing. What's the young minister we had before? Who am I talking about? Our young minister. I always call him young minister. I don't know why I'm blocking his
Carl
name.
Kroll.
You mean here?
Recent. I block on his name every time. Our recent minister.
You mean Michael Spitters?
Regional minister?
Michael Spitter.
Oh,
Michael
Michael.
Michael Spitters. Well, Michael got this invitation. He really threw it on me too. And he said from the Great Lake Bible College, you know, they
Oh,
had
yes.
in Lansing. And he said, Alex, why don't you go and talk to these people? I don't have time to. I went there and I was in a terrible, he just put me in a lion's den. and they jumped on me with all fours. I didn't realize that. See, I was supposed to be talking about explaining the difference between the three groups, the non-instrumental Church of Christ, and the independents, which they are, and the disciples. I've done this many places. So I thought he was doing that because I had done it. And when I finished, they just plowed into me. They just bring it all one way or the other. On doctrines, on ideology. See, it had nothing to do with the original split.
Right.
So now they have widened the gap considerably. They are way away from us in doctrine and everything. You know, you guys believe this and you guys believe this.
Well, let's get back to Homes in Eureka. Harold and Bob, your thoughts about what life was like at Homes in Eureka before the move.
I wasn't there that long. Bob was there longer than I was, because I was there when we got married, and from there on, and it wasn't too long, and we were on the move.
Okay. So, all right, Bob?
I think in those days, like our parents, they were real Christians. They were down to earth, and they taught well in the church, and children. I remember the ladies getting together at quilting, great big long quilts down in the basement. They'd make a lot of things for the service people. I think I remember very strict, you know, Christian thoughts and attitudes and everything, teaching the younger people. I still have, September 28, 37, when I was baptized, I still have my original apron that held while I was at the time.
So they had a real strong sense of Christian identity then.
Right.
Okay, all right.
But we had, like I say, some views in there, but I like the communion every Sunday. That was a big thing. Just, I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Now we get to the big question. Where did this idea of a move come from? Did it originate with one person? Is it something that percolated at the committee that you were on? And how was it received? I mean, was it a popular idea as soon as it was introduced, or did it take time for people to get used to it? What light can you shed on this?
Well, as a designer, and having worked with a number in my career churches, when there's a split, it really splits people up. And people left to go to the West Lansing Church. And even when I moved back here from living after I retired from the university, I was here 6 weeks and I had a job to do an addition to the church in Mason. And again, another split in the church. And as a designer, it was really fun trying to calm the waters with putting additions on and so forth. So the art of this church was no different. People left, and those that hung around, they did the best they could, and look what you ended up with, nice facility. And so, you know, people don't change a lot during the years. We may forget a lot, but they just keep repeating, doing the same mistakes. And it's too bad that we can't agree more.
How did you first hear about the idea of moving?
I've been trying to think back, and I really, I can remember meeting Don and Tricia board, and at that point, somewhere along the line, it had come up, but I really don't recall that much about it. To me, it was no big deal.
Not a surprise. No. All right.
We were just a very close-knit group, and we worked together. And I guess if you didn't like it, then it was your prerogative to adios amigos.
Somebody else? That's a good answer. Yeah, should we pull the plug on that?
Yeah, that's what I'd like to do.
Yeah.
Hold on, Mark.